Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Inspection Readiness. What is it, why it matters, and what you need to know to be prepared. My name is Aisha Rashid, and I will be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speaker. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speaker throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we will try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on. At this point, I'd like to thank Alison, who developed the content for this presentation. Alison is on a mission to help bring new therapies to light by solving the distinct challenges of small and mid-sized biotech companies. The company is purpose-built through the convergence of leading providers to address this unmet need. Today, Alison is a global provider of comprehensive drug development solutions, including consulting, clinical operations, biometrics, and clinical pharmacology across a variety of therapeutic areas. With more than 30 years of experience in over 60 countries, Alison's individualized partnership approach provides experience-driven insights and expertise to assist its clients in successfully navigating the complexities of delivering novel treatments to patients. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's event. Dr. Ernesto Vera Sanchez has 20 years of global regulator and inspectorate experience as a head of inspectorate for GCP, PHV, and GCP GLP at the Ministry of Health, Spanish Agency of Medicines and Medical Devices, or AEMPS. Dr. Vera Sanchez has exceptional expertise in legislation and compliance for clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, and GCP/GLP. His regulatory experience as expert inspector involved conducting over 400 worldwide inspections at sponsors, CROs, vendors, and clinical investigator sites for the EMA and AEMPS. He has worked since the beginning of the FDA EMA GCP initiative in 2009, being one of the first EU inspectors attending BMO training and joining FDA representatives in several observational and joint inspections as well, in different meetings, trainings, and conferences, as well as with other EU inspectors. Dr. Vera Sanchez has trained inspectors from regulatory authorities across Latin America and Asia in different disciplines related to GCP, PHV, and GCP GLP. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass over the mic to Dr. Vera Sanchez. You may begin when ready.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me today with this webinar about inspection readiness. We'll go through general aspect of regulatory inspections, what inspector may look at, where the findings are more usual, in which areas of inspections are they more frequent. I'm going to share with you 3 case studies and give you some key takeaways about inspection readiness. So the first thing is, I'm pretty sure many of you are familiar with this concept, but I want to stress out that it should be a competent authority, the one that conducts inspections. It means that doing an official review of documents, facilities, records, and any other resources related to clinical trials, and that they don't only go and check one of the objectives of the ICI-GCP, which is protect trial participants' welfare, rights, and safety, but also confirm the reliability of the data collected, in addition to verify the compliance with regulations and statutory obligations. Inspections can be generated as for cause or routine if they are areas of concern from regulators when they are assessing or validating either a CTA, a clinical trial application, or during the evaluation of a marketing authorization or NDA, as for cause inspection can be generated. But if the inspection is selected, prioritized along with others for an inspection plan, we're talking about routine inspections. Inspections can be also related to the generation type, announced or unannounced, but it should be expected according to the regulatory authorities' procedures. It's clear here that the unannounced inspection is where and when the most valuable expertise on inspection readiness will be shown. So this is a follow of events that can happen in a regulatory agency. There are some of them that may have additional approaches for this, but the important thing is that in generation of the inspections, if they are considered routine and are put it in a plan, this plan should be risk-based approach. It means that we'll take some of these items that I will show you here for creating that plan and do a prioritization according to those known risks. You have to have the risk known before you create a plan based on the risk approach. So hire recruiter, and we're talking about investigator sites, are usually selected for inspections, but also complex trial designs. New sponsors, sponsor with the first development, the outcome from previous inspections, especially when they're not positive or there are areas of concern to follow up in the new inspections. No previous inspection intelligence is a factor also to put in the list of criteria to select the inspections. This usually go along with the sponsor first development or unknown sponsor, but can happen also that the sponsor has never been inspected, even though if it's developed several clinical trials. Acquisitions, mergers, and transfer clinical studies is a regulatory intelligence that can be possible to have in a regulator environment. And I have to say that this will depend on the experience of the regulators to include it in the plan. And the drug-related aspects, like, for example, a new development methods, the target disease, or complex molecules. With regard to the for-cause inspections, there are some areas of concern that typical regulators are thinking on. For example, the frequency of serious adverse events in relation to the study disease, the protocol deviations that are being detected in the trial, the outcome of previous inspections, as I mentioned before, is an area of concern as well for cause inspections. The modifications to the protocol, statistical plans, and trial endpoints, and their time relationship with the finalization of the trial, or the database log or data analysis is an area of concern for regulators when they are assessing a dossier. And last but not least, the management of the serious breaches by the sponsor. Over these years, we were all focused on conducting and supervising clinical trials in an unknown situation like the COVID pandemic. But at the same time, every one of us was conscious of the resumption of the inspections that was published in the news from April 2021 up to February 2022, where it was said that the UK MHRA resumes in-person inspections, that the FDA will resume domestic inspection, and also that the FDA was firm on keeping GCP inspections in person. It is also true that in April 19, 2021, and we'll see in the graphs next, that the pandemic caused 34% drop in FDA investigator inspections in the fiscal year 2020. When we look at the numbers, we can see that drop. According to the MEA Annual Report 2020, we've seen that inspections fall down and 59 inspections, GCP inspections in 2020 compared to 137 in 2019. For the BIMO, FDA BIMO metric for the fiscal year 2020, we'll see that there are 213 clinical investigator inspections, and there were 30 GCP sponsor inspection in the period called pre-pandemic from October 1st, 2019 to March 12, 2020, compared to the period called post-pandemic from March 13, 2020 to September 30, 2020, where we can see that clinical investigator inspections were 125 and the sponsor GCP inspections were 29, one less than the previous time. So if there was a clear drop of inspections number and percentage compared with the previous one, but one can say, looking at the number, that the activity was maintained in a good shape. So it means that potentially inspections activities will importantly increase in 2022 and 2023. Now, there's a time for one poll question.
That's right. So it's time to go into our first poll question, and I would like to invite our audience members to participate in the poll question by submitting your answers to the question that is being presented on your screen. And that question that we have for you today is, have you been inspected in the last 5 years? Your answer choices are yes or no. Once again, the question that we have for you is, have you been inspected in the last 5 years? And your answer choices are yes or no. So I'm going to give our audience members a couple of more seconds to get in their responses. I will then close up the poll and share the results in real time. And then Dr. Vera Sanchez will be able to comment on those results. All right, so I see that most people are getting their votes in. I'm just going to give you all a couple of more seconds to vote on the poll question being displayed on your screen. Once again, that question is, have you been inspected in the last 5 years? You can respond with either a yes or a no. Okay, so it looks like most of our audience has voted, so thank you very much for your participation. I'm going to now share the results of the poll. So of our audience members, 44% said yes, that they have been inspected in the last 5 years, and 56% said no. Thank you once again for your participation, and it's back to you, Dr. Vera Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Well, that's a very interesting percentage. It's almost 50%, 50%. So I will definitely say that you will enjoy this webinar about inspection readiness, because we can also compare what I'm saying here with the reality of where the inspections were conducted. And for those of you that were not inspected or still not inspected, that this webinar will be very useful for you to put on your list what you have to do to avoid inspection findings. Thank you very much for that. Let's continue with the webinar. So now an inspection is coming, and we would all like to know, what do inspectors look at? Well, the inspection scope is different whether the inspection is conducted at a clinical investigator site or at the sponsor, CRO, or vendor's facilities. At an investigator site, inspectors can verify the adherence to the protocol, the delegation of tasks by the principal investigator, the supervision or oversight of the principal investigator on the trial staff and the actual trial as a last responsible for the execution of the trial at the investigator site. The trial documents, the investigator site file where essential documents are housed. But inspectors also look at the administrative aspect of regulatory documents like FDA 1572, that the approval or notification to the regulatory authority of the clinical trial, and the letter coming from the IRB of the ethics committee giving the favorable decision on the trial. Inspectors look at the whole process for informed consent, not only who and why and when the informed consent form is signed off. It's just the ethical process more important in a clinical trial. So the day when this occurred and who was given the consent, the way that this consent has been delivered to the trial participant is very important for inspectors and regulators. Also, the collection and reporting of adverse events or serious adverse events to the sponsor is one of the aspects inspectors look at, as well as the monitoring, especially if the site has implemented any of the actions the monitor point out, but also they look at the monitoring performance. If there is a local component in the laboratories, it means the local laboratories or other technical departments that were involved in the trial, inspectors look deeply to that part, those aspects. And some of the regulators going through the interface of the sponsor system and processes that you can evaluate as well at an investigator site inspection. When it comes to the sponsor inspections, the trial master file is the crucial element for inspectors. This should allow the reconstruction of the trial where study gaps can be identified. The management of the trial by the sponsor is a broad area and usually a source of findings. The processing, management, and reporting of adverse events or serious adverse event and the ongoing assessment of the risk balance is another aspect where inspectors get into. The investigational product, the shipping, the storage conditions, in some cases the manufacturing process, and the control that the sponsor had over it is assessed on inspections as well. The clinical data management and biostats as a source of relevant data is scrutinized as well. The global component of the laboratories, in this case at the sponsor level, and the adequacy of the audit plan for vendor selection, for instance, and the risk-based approach applied to that audit plan is very relevant for the inspections. And of course, the quality management system where the procedures governing the activities performed at the sponsor and the compliance over the course of the trial is tested. The oversight exercised by the sponsor on vendors is part of the vendor management that also includes the selection and the creation of the vendor preferred list, where an important oversight applying a risk-based approach is mandatory for inspectors. The production of the clinical study report and its quality control and quality assurance is a very, very crucial aspect. Remember that this is one of the deliverables that will go to the regulatory authority and that will lead to trigger inspections as well, or to reconstruct the trial in a way that it can be done. If there is any shortcoming shown in the CSR, this will definitely an area that inspectors will look at when they go at the sponsor after detecting in the preparation or even as a trigger of the inspection. And the archiving process, either the sponsor is using offsite archiving for some documents, the measures put in place to prevent the premature destructions, if we're talking about in paper documentation, but also the archiving of some computer systems after the termination and deployment of those when used in a clinical trial. When it comes to the zero of vendor inspections, in addition to the task contracted and delegated by the sponsor to the zero and vendor inspection that can include some of the previous processes that we have seen in the past slide, inspectors are looking also at general aspect of that zero or vendor, like quality management systems and other relevant aspects that will let them know that the selection of that zero or vendor was a robust process. And now we're going to talk about inspection findings. That's the most interesting part. And in which areas those findings are more common. So at investigator side, one of the areas with more deficiencies are found is the documentation and record keeping. Also, the lack of adherence to the protocol and the inadequate and ineffective delegation of task and oversight of the principal investigator is a common deficiency detected. Aspects related to the investigational medicinal product as well, and shortcomings on source data and data entered into the ECRF. This is basically detected when inspectors are doing the source data verification against the listing they are provided with, either from the CSR or from the database at the time when inspection is occurring. And of course, monitoring, because this is an aspect where inspectors put an effort to understand how the monitor was planned, if the monitoring was planned taking into account a risk-based approach, if the monitors had been stable activities at the site, or there was high turnover, or if the site didn't take the necessary actions pointed out by the monitors, as I said before. Well, at the sponsor, again, documentation record keeping is the area where most of the findings are shown. The TMF, as I said before, is a crucial element and always a source of findings. The vendor management and the oversight executed by the sponsor and the vendors that were contracted for key activities in the trial is also an area where findings are more common. The trial management, as I said before, is a broad area where you can have several aspects that show the room for improvement, and you can also detect some study gaps, because this includes from the trial startup up to the time when you receive the inspection, or to the time when the data has been sent to the regulatory authority were collected and analyzed, and the protocol deviation management and potentially serious breach. This is an aspect that definitely show a room for improvement in many of their organizations, as they may be from that the right staff are not involved in the management of protocol deviations, or the basis, procedures, or classification, the categorization of protocol deviations are not aligned with the regulatory obligation of the ICH-GCP. But also, contracts and agreements are part of those areas where findings are more common. Languages, text close on GCP, close on audits, and close on the GDPR where applicable, or privacy of data, are not included in contracts and agreement. This is one of the common findings in there. Of course, data management, the handling of the data, the documentation that shown evidence that the processes were performed according to procedures, and the technical aspect of the management of the data, safety management, collection, processing, handling, reporting, and maintaining source document in the corresponding safety database show room for improvement usually. Monitoring from a global perspective, from a sponsor perspective, the implementation of procedures where the organization stated the need for experience on certain areas where the sponsor is specialized, for example, in rare disease or in complex molecule. The experience of the monitor and the minimum requirements should be clearly stated in your procedures when selecting monitors. Before going to the case studies, I just want to bring your attention that the validation and the qualification process and records and the SOPs governing these activities for any of the computerized system used in the processes I mentioned before can be also checked by inspectors, and they will be coming through a data integrity issue if it's detected. So now, as I said at the beginning, I brought today 3 study cases that I will share with you. So the first case is about an investigator site that was participating in a pivotal trial. That site was the hire recruiter. When inspection took place, inspectors determined that there was a failure to demonstrate an adequate GCP oversight and trial management at the site level. That also, there was a lack of quality control over the trial conduct. That can be a shared responsibility, for say something. And the insufficient quality of critical trial documents. So, and what were the actions the organization put in place, and how you can just avoid it in advance? So, increasing the oversight of the sponsor on critical aspects of the trial through an implementation of a risk proportionate approach in clinical trials. Improving procedures that governs quality control and the appropriate communication of outcome to the trial sponsor. This is related to monitoring and other quality control aspects that are exercised on behalf of the sponsor, like audits as well. The escalation of issues and the pathway to whoever will be designated to receive it, and the actions implemented for that is crucial in a well-managed organization for performance. Revising the site qualification process, enhancing, of course, the quality assurance and control on the trial documents. This was necessary to tackle the insufficient quality of the clinical trial documents, but also retraining the internal and external staff on the GCP and regulatory obligations. The second case study I brought today is related to a medium-sized pharma company that conducts a trial with 120 clinical investigator sites and with 435 trial participants recruited. Inspectors found out that the TMF was not inspection ready, so it was not evidence that could ensure that has been prepared for an inspection and available for an inspection. There were deficiencies in computer's trial system that were having an impact on data corrections, imagine the important part of it, and relevance documents approval. And there were also poor control measures to avoid data privacy breach. So how you can avoid that? For instance, implementing an adequate management plan for the TMF from the beginning of the trial and exercising as well an effective oversight and control over it. We have to remember that the TMF has to be set up even before the trial started, up to the end of the trial and how it has been defined in the processes and the contracts and agreements. The oversight on it has to be excellent and adequate and effective. Increasing or executing an adequate oversight on the qualification and validation process, especially in the UAT, the user acceptance testing step that guarantees satisfactory performance. Sometimes they're not the right people in the right place. The right people is not participating on the UAT for, say, for changing that phrase, the right people is the right staff or the user, the final user are not present, where this important and crucial test is performed. So nobody can be able to detect those issues that come up later. And finally, we're evaluating and implementing the GDPR in those countries where it's applicable, or a data privacy training for clinical staff, creating SOPs if they're not existing, and ensuring that language about privacy or the GDPR clause is included in the agreements and contracts, in addition to other trial documentation where the clause is mandatory per regulatory obligations. And the last case is about a service provider for that create and develop a tool, technology tool, that he was using a non-pivotal trial. So inspectors found that there were an inadequate setup of changes implemented on efficacy endpoint components following the trial sponsor instruction. It means that the vendor service provider set up a wrong changes on efficacy endpoint. There was a misinterpretation of the trial sponsor instructions, that the mitigation activities or actions that were implemented late on and they were not focused on the preservation of the data integrity of the trial. And of course, there were insufficient control measures for detection of the project errors at the organization. So how we can avoid that one? For instance, enhancing the oversight executed by the sponsor on a critical service provider in a routine manner or on a specific task. Always align with the risk proportionate approach. So the risk proportionate approach will help their organization to select the specific task that have to be more deeply or close monitor or surveillance, in addition to the risk factor or the risk tier that the organization has developed, and developing and implementing an impact assessment plan for critical changes in the project. Once you know that there are some critical changes that may impact or that will impact, for instance, the primary efficacy endpoint, the resources you allocate to that supervision, as it was delegated to external service provider, will be more than for those ones that are not necessarily reaching the level of criticality according to your tool for the risk approach. And finally, the questions one may have is why I need to be prepared, or my organization needs to be prepared inspection ready. Well, because this process will ensure the project is successful and the objectives that were planned at the beginning of the project are accomplished. Also to demonstrate that the organization has a robust process in place for managing a clinical trial. In addition to that, that will help for facilitating a more efficient or smooth inspection, and as a consequence, it will avoid unexpected situations during the inspection. So when inspection is coming, please remember that a regulatory authority like EMA, FDA, or other regulators will be present at your facilities, looking at your documents, your data, and your processes. And in addition to you to create a logistic plan and communicate internally and externally that an inspection will take place, and selecting the subject matter expert or appoint the subject matter expert that you're already designated for the inspections according to your processes. In addition to the preparation of the inspection itself, the creation of storyboards, and the execution or conduction of mock inspections, the organization has to ensure that all the processes, procedures, data collected and documented from the cradle to the grave, from the trial setup up to the time when the inspection takes place, or the period where the data cover the inspection that is coming to your door, have to be GXP compliant. And this should be all the time. So that is unlikely to happen if you don't establish an ongoing surveillance program for all your trials at the organization level. If you haven't created a risk proportionate approach and apply to all the GXP processes that can be beneficial for them, if there is no top level oversight in your organizations for those activities that are critical, especially critical for clinical trials, if the procedures governing those processes and activities performed are not maintained up to date, if the cross-functional areas never met, and they don't engage each other in different multi-factors meetings. That would be very complicated for you to have inspection readiness in successful. Now is the time for the second and the last poll question. Thank you.
That's right, Dr. Vera Sanchez. So we have a final poll question for our audience members to participate in real time. And that question should be appearing on your screen at the moment. The question is, if you have to choose between the two inspection readiness activities below, which one will you select? And the options that you have are storyboards or mock inspections. Once again, the question is, if you have to choose between the two inspection readiness activities below, which one will you select? Either storyboards or mock inspections. So please take a moment to submit your vote for this question. Your participation is greatly appreciated. And as with the last poll question, we will also share the results in real time with you and proceed with that. So I'm going to give our audience members a couple of more seconds to get in their votes before I close up the poll. So please take a moment to submit your vote. All right, I can see that most of our audience members have voted, so thank you very much for doing so. I'm going to close up the poll and let's take a look at the results. So 12% of our audience said that they would choose storyboards and 88% said mock inspections. So thanks again for your participation, and we'll send it back to Dr. Vera Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you, for voting, and thank you very much, Ayesha. Well, that's not surprising to me. 88% of you will select mock inspection. But remember, storyboards are very important. They will show the deficiencies or the aspect that has room for improvement in your organization, and it's worthy to have them, to create them, and also work with the areas and the cross-functional areas, as I said before, that everybody will know what the areas that has to be improved are located and what they were, what the issues were. An important thing that I have to say is that if you're going to implement both of them, or you're going to use both of them for your inspection readiness activity, don't use the same team that will be conducting the, I would say, the hearing of the storyboards, that usually is quality assurance, on the mock inspection, because that will be, can cause a potential bias in the mock inspection if you will perform the mock inspection in a totally mimic fashion to the regulatory authorities inspections. So separate the team, and that the team conducting each of the activities won't talk to each other. This is the approach we are using in my department, the GXP Strategy Consulting Department, to avoid any bias and to look entirely to the items we need to look when we do an inspection, an mock inspection. Okay, thank you. So going forward, I would like just to share with you the wonderful team that worked with me in the GXP Strategy Consulting Department. So from the left to the right, Nuno Pires is the director of the GXP Strategy Consulting. He used to be an inspector on the European Regulatory Agency and worked on behalf of the MEA in several inspections. Angela Rhodes is also a director of the GXP Strategy Consulting Services. Angela used to be FDA BIMO inspector for over 10 years. And Daniela Brescia, the manager at GXP Strategy Consulting. He has over 15 years of experience in clinical research from CRA, senior CRA, and qualified auditor, and different audits and GXP areas. So with that, I will say thank you very much for attending this webinar today. And we're going to go for the quality question and answer, with a quality fashion session. And I try to respond your questions in the best way possible. Thank you. Passing to you, Aisha.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vera Sanchez. And that's right, we are heading into the Q&A session. So we would continue to appreciate if you could please send in your questions for Dr. Vera Sanchez, and we will try to get to your questions in the session. So to kickstart the Q&A, Dr. Vera Sanchez, I have the first question here, and that is, how can an organization manage the conduct of storyboards and mock inspections for inspection readiness?
Well, I think I just responded to this question before. I will give you some hints. The storyboard should be first in a chronological order before the mock inspection. The storyboard should be leading by somebody that can take decisions on the corrective action plan that will be implemented later. Those corrective actions plan, if the inspection has been announced already, are to be part of the outcome of the inspection that is necessary to provide this information to the inspectors if they look at that specific aspect. The mock inspection should be conducted in a really mimicking how the authorities are conducting inspection. That piece of activity should not be a discussion environment, should be receipt of information by the mock inspectors and questions coming from them to the audience. It should be very strict on the selection on the subject matter expert. Try to resemble what you would do in a real inspection, and don't hesitate to spend or invest more than 2 days in a mock inspection, because the real inspections, at least for NDAs and for marketing authorization applications, can last from 3 or 4 days up to 2 weeks, depends on the regulatory authority. So it is clear that you should combine those aspects and look at the most cost-effective activity or timing, but spend and invest your time on that, because that will definitely ensure you will be successful when the inspection finished.
Thank you very much for that answer, Dr. Vera Sanchez. Let's go to our next question. And this question is asking, would you say the 3 more important topics are vendor selection, vendor agreements, and task delegation? and risk management of the study?
Well, they're definitely very important. The important thing here is that they're interconnected. If you don't really have a robust risk management plan or risk approach, a proportion plan in place, it will be very difficult to say that your vendor management was in line to any other hierarchical document like the risk management plan. It was not aligned to nothing. You have to demonstrate then where in your clinical trials do you have those risk criteria laid out, and why you selected those criteria for risk. Remember that the risk criteria has to be known risk. You need to have them in your history for using them, or you have to have that intelligence for using them. Unknown risk in the risk-based approach plan are not definitely recommended, because you don't know exactly what will be the behavior of that risk in your trial. Once you have a risk management and appropriate proportionate plan, you can go through a vendor selection process using those risks that you have identified for your organization or for your trial without create new vendor risk criteria. And of course, delegation of tasks will be very related to that risk management plan. So in summary, the risk management proportionate approach plan or risk-based approach plan will contain all the known risk for all the activities that will be performed or conducted at your organization at any time. If there is any additional risk that you haven't put in the plan, it's because you haven't envisioned that one, because it's a new one that you can add it anytime, because this is a live document, and then implement it in the corresponding activities. But for me, the three that you mentioned before, your question is the question is staying, is the risk management plan, the first one.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that answer. Let's go to another question. And that question here is, do you recommend that the sponsor join the site inspection on site or only be available to answer possible questions?
Well, it would depend on the regulatory authorities. Some of regulators don't have in their procedures the acceptance of the sponsor to be present in inspection at a clinical investigator site. When I was an inspector, we really appreciate the interest of the sponsor to be present. But we always were clear saying that the sponsor is there to help to the clinical investigator organizations and staff, but not to respond questions unless the questions will be sponsor related. So you definitely need to know in your regulatory intelligence which regulatory authority will be conducting the inspection, and then take a decision, open the conversation with the regulatory authorities or actually with the site if they have more experience in that way.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I think we have time to squeeze in one more question. And that question is, in your experience in a sponsor vendor inspection, can you name the areas which had findings that affected data integrity?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because data integrity can come from an essential document up to a data privacy breach or passing through an issue in the data management or data transfer from external vendors or the handling of data. So for me, it would definitely lies on the management of vendors, the oversights execute on some vendors that are performing key activities in the trial that were delegated with, for example, stat analysis, data management, even database as a database owner, or the electronic platform where data are going through those databases that later on have to be transferred to the sponsor global database or the delegate global database. The vendor selection is very important for us, or was very important for inspections, is very important for auditors. The TMF also can be one of the aspects where data integrity can put at risk, especially if the essentials document that are hosted are not showing evidence of, for example, the oversight executed by the sponsor on those critical activities. For an example, saying there was an amendment of the statistical plan or an interim analysis performed unexpected on, and there is not documentation related to those aspects from a data management perspective that inspectors can use for reconstructing and ensure that it was a data integrity preservation on those processes, and there were not dissemination of any information throughout the vendors or the service providers that were used for that, or even internally, and especially in a double-blind trial. So, in summary, the data integrity is not only related to the data management or stat analysis. Of course, I agree that there are important source of data, relevant data, but also in the rest of the processes that are used and involved in the clinical trials, from essential documents up to safety management. So there are many areas where with the help of a risk management plan or risk approach proportion plan, you will figure out and envisage where you will need more resources to invest for avoid a data integrity issue in your trial.
Well, thank you very much to our speaker, Dr. Vera Sanchez, for that very insightful presentation and for that wonderful Q&A session. So the Q&A session portion has come to an end, as has the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Allison may follow up with you. Or if you have any further questions, you can also direct them to the email address on your screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in your chat box, and you'll be able to view the recording of this event on this page. And you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I do encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking today's speaker, Dr. Ernesto Vera Sanchez. We hope you found this webinar informative. On behalf of the team here at Xtalks, thank you for joining us. Please take care and bye for now. Thank you once again, Dr. Vera Sanchez. Bye.